All right, so watch me do one, and then we'll do one together, and then you'll be able to play some, okay? So just like before, new composition, 960, 540, 30 frames per second, 3 seconds. Remember, not 30 seconds or 3 minutes, 300. All right, now when we did a new solid, we went here to new solid. You'll see that there's also a new shape layer in this area. We don't need to go to that, okay? Because the shape layers are right here. Every time we use one of these, it'll create either a new shape or a new shape layer, okay? So if we click and hold on it, these are all the default shapes that you could use. Now from here, you can customize them even further once you start creating them. So just to keep it simple, I'm just going to create an ellipse. So there's two ways we can create a shape. If I double click on that, it'll automatically create a shape for me. If I just click and drag, it'll let me draw it. Okay, so I'll do the click and drag first. There it is. Okay, now here's the double click, and you see how it creates it. Now what's neat about it is that the double click is cool because it centers it and it makes it fit the entire size of this document. If we had something that we wanted to scale from the center of our document out, this is the perfect thing to do that with. Okay, if we had something where we weren't really caring about that, we could just click and drag it. Now if I'm still on that tool and I still click and drag, I'm still on that tool and I click and drag more, you'll see that it doesn't create a new shape layer. All it's doing is just adding stuff to that existing shape layer, okay? So on one shape layer, you could have multiple shapes. And the point of that is that you could actually use these shapes to create new shapes. So here I could say, I don't know. Yeah, that was it. Normal. Exclusion. There we go. So you can see how I can like subtract pieces of this one. And there's other stuff that we can do too inside here where we actually start like divvying up the shapes and like cutting them out and stuff, okay? For everything that we're going to be doing for this initial assignment, double clicking is going to be the best bet, okay? It does more than just give us a perfectly sized item and centered, but it also puts our pivot right at the center point of it. When I click and drag, I'm just going to click off of this and then make one so you can see it. When I click and drag, its pivot point is right here. So basically every time I create one, I would have to then go and move the pivot so it's back to being centered, so it's in like a good spot. Okay. Now what I don't like about this initial shape is that it's an oval, so I want to use a circle. Circles are typically better than ovals for doing what we're going to be doing. So just like before, you'll see there's a transform tab. Typically every layer except for like audio files will have a transform tab where you can change the anchor point, the position, the scale, the rotate, and blah blah blah, all that stuff. With a shape layer, you get this other one, which is contents. And inside the contents, you'll get like a whole bunch of other stuff. And depending on what you've chosen, so this is a ellipse, so I get the ellipse path. Here's the size of the path, here's the position of the path, here is the stroke, here is the fill, here is the ellipse transformation, okay? So there's on each shape, there's its own transformation information, and then there's the shape layers transformation information, okay? That might be confusing at first. You'll get used to it, okay? Basically, I can animate the position of just this one item in the shape, and then I can also animate the entire shape as one, okay? You know how I can grab multiple shapes and put them in the same layer? Okay, so I may want to grab all of those at the same time and move them, or just animate one individual piece on that thing, okay? So that's where we have this. You'll also see there's a couple extra ones. There's one called skew axis. Those ones are just extra ones specifically to that shape. If you're not sure about it, just open it up and look at it. This one says transform ellipse. This one just says transform. Okay. Way at the top, we have more options. Okay. So right now we have, this is a fill. So if I click on the word fill, I can choose what kind of fill it is. Right now we're at a solid fill. There's a gradient, there's a radial gradient, there's no fill. There's back to my solid. I could also change my mode. I could also change the opacity. Okay. I also have the fill color, so if I click on the fill color, then I can actually pick whatever color I want. Here's the stroke, same thing. Stroke color, and then we also have the stroke thickness. Okay. Excuse me. All right, so here's what we want to do with this. I want to take this ellipse and I want to make it a circle. So I'm going to go to the size of my path, turn off the chain, and make them both 540. Okay? So that way, if they're both the same exact number, I should have a circle. That makes sense? Yeah. Okay. So then what I want to do is I want to animate, and this came up the other day, somebody wanted to animate like a wipe, like a circle wiping onto the screen. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. Now there's no option inside here by default to do that. We have to add that in. So that's what this add is for, is we can add stuff into this mix. So I'm going to add in this thing called trim path. Okay, you see how it gets another little tab here. I can open this up, and then I'm going to turn the fill off. I'm going to take the stroke up really big so you can see it. And you'll see on this trim path, there's a start, there's an end, and there's an offset. So you'll see where it starts. I need a bigger screen. There we go. You'll see where it ends, and then we'll play with the offset, okay? So I just click and drag, and you can see how it does this like little wipe. Now you might say, that's cool, I want the fill in there too, otherwise it looks kind of weird. Well, the fill doesn't really do like an awesome job. You'll see it's basically connecting the start point and the end point, and you get this like weird line connecting them. So that's why we don't use the fill. Okay, so if I do want a fill on this, I just take the stroke up to a really big number, and that gives me the look of having a fill right on top of it. Okay, and I can color that whatever I want. Now when I do that, I have to obviously make sure that I've covered that circle in the center. Now there is a little bit of using one number to make it sure it's the correct size. So this number here is 540. That was the size of our circle. So if I take this number here and I make that 540, it'll fit exactly. Okay? If I go over 540, I'll get something weird. So here's what we want it to look like. So I'm going to go back to my start and end. See how perfect that is? Right from the center. I'll zoom in really close so you can see it. Right from the center, it spins around. Okay? That's right at 540. So whatever this number is, that's what that number is. Perfect. Okay? Now if I go higher than 540, so let's say I go to that much. Look what happens. I get this like weird extra line on the other side. Okay? Because it actually like went through. Now, for some instances, that might be a neat effect that you do want to add, but for a wipe, typically not. But you may find a way to use it. Okay? So I typically just leave that at 540. Alright, so then the next question is, it doesn't fit all the way, right? So if you look at this, you'll see that the very, very corners don't fit all the way. So I could do a couple things. One thing, I could just take this size and make that bigger, and then I can go up to that stroke and make the stroke bigger. I could do that. Or I can just hit S for scale and just scale it up a little bit. Okay, either one works. In After Effects, when you're using the built-in shapes, you're creating vector artwork. So whether it's this big or that big, doesn't matter. We can scale it up or shrink it down or whatever, and we won't lose any of that resolution. Okay, so I'm going to take this, and I'm going to go to that trim path. And there's no hotkey for it, unfortunately. We just have to whittle our way down to it. I'm going to reset the end to 0. I'm going to set a keyframe here. I'm going to go up to, let's say, 10 frames. Put it up to 100. Whoop. Cool. And then I will make this easy ease. Go to my graph editor. And I think I want to go fast at first and then slow at the end. There we go. Now that's cool. Alright. Now, just so we can see what the other ones do. So end is basically adjusting where the end point of that curve is. So what do you think start's going to do? Right, the other way. So whatever the start is, it's just going to go that way instead. Okay? So just so you can see it, it's going to go that way. So if I was going to do like a radar blip type thing, I could actually use start and end, and then I could use offset to have it sweep across. Okay? Now you could also use these in combination with other things. So as one thing is kind of wiping around like this, I have another shape like that kind of following it along. So don't think that we always have to do just like the 5 duplicates, offsetting them, changing color. We can add other stuff to it. All right, so just for this initial one, we'll keep it simple. Whoop, there we go. And we duplicate just like we did before. Make sure I duplicate the layer itself, not the shape underneath, because I can't offset the shape underneath. I can only offset the shapes, the layers. So then I'll just scoot these down a smidge. And I don't have to go Control-Shift-Y or anything. The color's right there, so I'll just pick a new color. And it's morning, so we'll pick some really bright colors to wake us up. There we go. Horrendous. I almost have CMYK right there. Look at that. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Almost. Same thing with motion blur, so we can turn motion blur on. Okay, we'll still get those motion blur effects. Okay, so that was just as simple as the other one. The only thing we're doing different is we're using the ellipse, creating a perfect circle, and then adding the trim path, and then going around with it. Okay, so now let's do that together. So what's our first step? New composition. And because you just started up your computers, remember your settings are probably going to be defaulted back to what they were defaulted to the first time. So always double check. That's why you have your little cheat sheet. The only thing that's not on the cheat sheet is the duration. For this specific project, you can basically start off at 300. And then obviously give it a name at the top. If you remember the steps and you want to go ahead forward, go ahead forward. If not, just follow with me, okay? All right, what's the next step after we have created our composition? Yep, so we're going to go up 2 shapes. Choose the ellipse from the group. And then how do we create it? Double click. Yep. So just double click it. You have to go click on the word fill and tell it no fill. And then we already know that the stroke is going to be 540, so you can click on the pixels and change it to 540. Make sure when you're clicking on these things, you click on the word fill versus the color fill. That's different. Okay, so you can make your stroke 540 because you know it's already going to be 540. Okay, in your layers, you should be able to open up the ellipse and find the ellipse size. It's going to be under ellipse path, and then it'll say size. Okay, so we should be able to click the chain off, 540 by 540. Everyone good so far? Everyone bad so far? Same thing. Same response, no matter what. All right, now how do we add that trim paths to this? We go to add, and then we find trim paths. See how simple After Effects is? Okay, so we went to add, we chose trim paths. You'll see a huge list there. We will not go through an entire list of things. I recommend that at some point, you have a boring Sunday, just go through and play with them. See what they do. You might find something that's really neat in there. You can animate the start or the end. It does not matter. Okay? The idea is that you have the start at 0, the end is at 100, and however you want to animate it. So if I'm going to animate the start, I'm going to start it at 100 and then go to 0. If I'm doing the end, I'm going to start at 0 and go to 100. Okay? So whichever one you want to do, just click and drag one of them to see the animation. Set your keyframe, go up to about 10, change the value. Alright, so now we have that. So what do we have to do next? Scale it up, right? Because we got those weird corners. So you can just hit S for scale, and then just put it to like 105 or something. It's usually enough. Whatever you need to, just to get it to go beyond it. Alright, so now it's scaled. We have some keyframes. What next? Easy ease, yes. So I hit S. My stuff is now gone. I'm too lazy to go and open up all those arrows. What's the quick way to get back to those keyframes? U. So easy ease. And then go to your graph editor, right? Go the opposite way this time. I'm going to go fast at the end. That was a little bit too fast. Slow it down. There we go. Okay, so we have a nice little animated piece here. Before we start duplicating this, what I want you to do is I want you to color it white. Super white. Yes. Alright, so now we have a white wipe going across our screen or going around the screen. Alright, so now what do? Duplicate, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 copies. Do your offsets. And then when you color them shades of gray. So white will be your brightest, and then the number 5 will not be black, it'll be just like a dark gray, and then go in between those. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate as far as how you get there, just make sure that there's shades of gray. Okay, so remember last time we talked about we can create a color scheme and then we can adjust the color scheme of the stuff. That's what we're going to do with this one. Okay, so we have a very basic setup here, right? The only thing that's different is we used a shape layer. We used a trim path. That was pretty much it. The keyframing is the same. The easy ease is the same. The graph editor is exactly the same. Offsetting was the same. We changed the colors. Okay, so in Photoshop, you have your layers over here. And let's say you want to do something to all the layers below something. Like you have a group of layers, you want to change all the color of those layers. What would you put above it? Nope. Adjustment layer, right? So After Effects has adjustment layers. So under Layer, New, go to Adjustment Layer. You'll see the hotkey Control-Alt-Y. I clicked the wrong button. Hold on. Alright, so adjustment layer, it goes to the very top, or should be on the very top. Anything below that layer will be affected by this. So whatever we add to this will affect all the layers below it. So layer, new, adjustment layer, we get an adjustment layer. Okay, you'll also notice that it has this thing on there. That's what makes it an adjustment layer, that little like circle with the slash in it. So now under effect, under color correction, here's a whole bunch of different ways that we can manipulate the color of this grayscale image. Now some of these are going to work better than others. So if I just go to hue and saturation on the adjustment layer, right now this isn't going to do anything, right? I change the hue. There's no hue to these. There's no saturation to them, and values of brightness. So all the hues are the same, so this isn't going to do anything. If I change the saturation, it's not going to do anything. If I change the lightness, it will do something, okay? So because we have a grayscale, that's all it's going to do. Now if I come down here to colorize though, what it's going to do is it's going to take a color and overlay it on top of all of these. So now I have this like reddish color, that's the color there. And I could change that just by going here. Now you'll notice that the white doesn't change. Okay, my darkest color does. There's my darkest color. The white here doesn't change. White can't have a color on top of it with this method. If I wanted that white to have some sort of tinting to it, I would have to take the white color of this original shape, which is down here, and I would have to take it away from being a pure white. The second I bring it up a little bit like this and hit OK, now it's subtle, but it has a little bit in there. The further I go, the more it'll have that pinkish tint to it. Okay, I'm fine with it being perfectly white. Whenever we do an effect, it opens up the effects controls. So you'll see that our project window is no longer there. Now I have this effects controls area, but I can control all of these different things, and I can basically make this whatever color I want. So if I have a project that I need greens for, or blues for, or yellows for, very quickly I can use this same shape for all of that stuff. Now before you do yours, I want to point out a couple things. I'm going to motion blur all this stuff. Okay, see how nice these are blending from one to the other, right? Okay, so what happens with a hue and saturation is that it basically, like I said, does a color overlay on top of all of these colors. All right, so I'm going to delete this for a second. Actually, I'll just hit this FX. Anytime you see an FX, just like Photoshop, you can just turn that effect off. So now it's not there anymore. Now I'm back to my original colors. Okay, so now I'm going to do a different color correction. I'm going to do a tint. Okay, yeah, tint, that would be fine. So I'm going to take the blacks and map it to red, sure. Take the whites and map them to a whitish red. Okay, and still we're getting pretty good results. Everything looks like it's blending nicely together. All right, so we'll turn that one off. Now let's go back in here. Those two so far work. Where's the other one? Oh, they moved it out. That's what it is. Or maybe I don't have it. I do have it. Color correction. CC toner. That'll work. So this one here, I'm going to map the highlights to this color. I'm going to map the midtones to that color and map my shadows to that color. Well, that one's working pretty good too. There is one on yours. Maybe I have to search for it. They may have moved it in this version. You have to spell it right too. There it is. Okay, so it's called Colorama. So I'm just blind, and I did not see that it was under color correction. Effect, color correction, Colorama. I am blind. There we go. All right, so with this one, this is a more advanced one. So what this is going to do is it takes the intensity, so the brightness of this, and it remaps the brightness to certain values. So the brightest values get this red color. The darkest values will get the red color also, and then it maps all the way around here. Okay, so what's cool about this is that you can say I want to solarize red or Caribbean. They have like these presets, which is really cool. But the point of this one is that some of these aren't going to work really good just because of how it blends together. You can see we're getting some really harsh edges here, and we've kind of lost that effect that we had a second ago where it had definitive shapes. Okay, so some of these are going to work better than others. The idea with it is if one isn't working, try something else. Okay, Now, just to show you how cool layer effects are, if I went to distort and I went to that's a cool one. I'll try ripple pulse. Okay, so ripple pulse has a center. So you see where it says center here. Here's all the specific things I can adjust. I'm going to turn off my motion blur just so I can see this. I'm going to take my amplitude up. Alright. Oops. Alright. Doesn't want to do anything on this specific one. Let me pick a different one. Like I said, some of these don't work perfectly with this kind of method. Others do. Oh, there we go. Alright, so ripple, like this one. So we can get this kind of like neat psychedelic effect by just adding this ripple. And instead of adding it to each one of those layers, I just add it to the adjustment layer and it affects, again, everything below it, which is super awesome. I can adjust the wave height here. I can take the wave width down or up. Take the speed down. I'm going to hit N to get my work area. There we go. Okay. So what I want you to do is play with that. Okay, I want you to, on some of your page transitions, do some adjustment layers. You have to do on all of them. I just want to see that you can do it. Okay, not on this one specifically because we just did that one together. But do one on your own. Okay, now the other thing you have to watch out for is, remember the thing we did last time too with the drop shadow? So some of that doesn't work, again, with these kinds of effects. So you have to figure out the best way to get what you want out of things. So if I put drop shadow on one of these, and I take my distance up, oops, not up, my softness up, there we go, and then I copy this to all my other layers, paste them in there. You'll see that my drop shadow is no longer just a regular drop shadow. Because of the color tinting, I'm actually getting like this red halo around it. Okay? So again, some things are going to work, some things are not going to work the way you think. Okay? Now if I turned off the tint one, and maybe turned on the hue, oops, come on. Yeah, I'm still getting the same thing. Okay. Sometimes, like I said, you'll get better results. Like the tint actually looks a little bit better than the hue. Or no, the hue looks better than the tint. Yeah, because it still looks like I have a shadow underneath it. Okay, and what's cool about the hue one is that you can just literally go in there and just say different color, green. Desaturate it, maybe lighten it or darken it some. Cool. Alright, now you can do a load of stuff with this. Now I did this one that's just like a little wipe like that. We could also use right next to it this pen tool. And the pen tool will just create strokes. So I could just go like that and that. You'll see it creates a shape layer. And then just like we did the trim path on the other one, I could do a trim path on this. So I could actually have these things go boom to connect them and then fall down if I wanted to or whatever. Okay? These little rounded ones, same thing. See how those are like rounded shapes? This stroke that I have here, if I go to the options for it, stroke, shape, stroke, you'll see that the line cap right now says butt cap, which basically means make it a blunt, flat cap. But if I change this to rounded, oops, there we go, you'll see that we get that. Then we can make it bigger. Okay? So that's why we have to experiment. We have to play with these because you can create a whole bunch of shapes just right inside of After Effects. So there's where ours is. So what I would do is just take these pull them all off screen and scale them up really big. Okay, now if I animated the start and the end on these, then you would see both of those pieces coming in together. So just so you can see that happen, I have to open this back up. I'm going to go to let's start at 100 to 0. I'm going to rescale this so I can actually see what I'm doing. Oops. So this is going to be at 50. That one's at 50. Good. And this is going to go to 0. This will go to 100. There. Okay. Do the same thing with my easy eases. Same thing with the graph editor. Notice how one graph goes up, one goes down. Just because one's going positive direction, one's going negative direction, doesn't mean anything else. There we go. Now I can make that bigger. Now I can pull this down. Maybe I'll even make this a little bit slower at the end. There we go. And now I could just do the same thing, just duplicating it and offsetting it if I wanted to. Okay? At the end of it, there's something on the screen. The start of this one, there's nothing on the screen. Oops, there shouldn't be anything on the screen. At the end of it, there's nothing on the screen. There's something on the screen. Same thing here. Same thing there. Same thing here. Okay? So make sure the very first frame there's nothing on your screen, and then it goes to the very end. Okay? Play with different methods. Don't do just solids. Don't do just shapes. Don't do just adjustment layers. Play with the 3 different ones that I just said, and then also play with different things in here. Don't use a star tool, that never turns out good. You can use the polygon, you can use the rounded rectangle, you can use the regular rectangle. Play with those. Play with some of these different effects under color correction. Okay? Now, one thing to keep in mind too is it's a transition. It's an animation in itself, but it's not an animation that people want to see, right? They're going to your work to see your actual work. And the transition is just an elegant way to get from one piece to the next piece. That's all it is. So just to give an example, let me go to this one, which is pretty simple, right? So I would have students who are like, okay, I want to add some fancy stuff in here. I need a lens flare. Boom. Actually, more lens flares are better. Let's add some more in here. Let's put one there. Here. Oops. There. Oop. I have lens flares, but there's no lightning, so you have to add lightning too. I use the effects and presets for most things. It's 10 times easier to find stuff in there. You just type in what you want. Oops. Go to the advanced lightning, so it's even better. There we go. Boom. So there's their page transition. Right? And they would have this animated with their thing happening, and it's like, oh my god, it's too much. Keep them simple. Okay? You don't need bells and whistles. All it is, super simple. We start off with nothing. We end up with one flat color on the screen. Okay? If you end up with like 30 flat colors, have some way to transition to one flat color at the end. Right? So if I animated, let me delete this because I can't stand looking at it. Alright. So if I animated this thing like that for whatever reason, and then it just stops there, so I'm just going to set some keyframes just temporarily like that. Okay. And then I duplicated this and I scooted it up, and I duplicated it and scooted it up, I duplicated it and scooted it up. Alright, and then just have to reorganize these so that they go below it and not above it. There we go. Alright, so if I ended up like this, and I really should offset these two. It's like so picky, right? There we go. Okay. So if I ended up with something like this, I did not end on a flat color. So I want to find a way to make it a flat color. So what I would typically do in something like this is I would then go back to my first shape, set some initial keyframes again, scoot up a little bit, and then finish it off. This goes back to 0, this goes back to 100. Oops. Okay, so that way we still get the effect, and it closes. Now you'll see how it's kind of like warbling, right? It's kind of like wavering right there. Because of how I set these keyframes, the speed graph actually keeps moving. Where it should stay still, right here and there, the next two keyframes, it should stay still, it doesn't. So I'm going to right click on these and toggle these to be hold keyframes. So basically what that means is go from here to here and then hold those keyframes until you get to the next one. Okay, so don't move. So I shouldn't get this kind of thing as it moves. There we go. So it still does the rest of the animation perfect, but it doesn't go past those keyframes and create something kind of wonky. Oops. There we go. So now you see, I start off with 0, no color. I have my effect, and then it closes, and then I have my solid color at the end. Okay, does that make sense? All right. Any questions?